I've always been the type of person drawn to the unknown, to the adrenaline that comes from mystery. I was never someone who let fear intimidate me. In fact, I always saw fear as a challenge, an emotion to be explored. So when my friends suggested the idea of exploring an abandoned psychiatric hospital in our city, I thought it was perfect. The place had been shut down for decades, yet it was surrounded by dark stories. Many claimed to hear inexplicable voices coming from the building, shadows that seemed to come to life, and even tales of patients still wandering the halls as if eternally trapped there. While most people avoided the building with absolute fear, for us, it was the perfect setting for an unforgettable adventure. So, on a Friday night, we gathered at the hospital entrance, armed with flashlights and cameras, ready to face whatever awaited us. We crossed the threshold with excitement, but as soon as we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air felt dense, heavy, laden with something we couldn't see. It was as if an invisible presence was watching us, almost as if the hospital itself was aware of our arrival. The environment was dark, with deep cracks in the floor and walls stained with moisture, while an oppressive smell of mold and rust filled the air. We walked cautiously and soon noticed handprints on the walls, as if someone had scratched desperately trying to escape. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then we heard something disturbing, a distant sound like shuffling footsteps echoing down the hallways. We laughed to cover our nervousness, feigning courage, but the tension on our faces was undeniable. We kept walking, exploring every corner of that abandoned hospital. We entered old rooms where rusty beds and broken medical equipment told silent stories. In one room, we found dusty medical records seemingly abandoned in haste, as if the former staff had left without looking back. Each hallway felt narrower and more oppressive than the last, and the intense darkness forced us to rely solely on our flashlights, which flickered in a strange game with the shadows. The silence was nearly absolute, broken only by sudden creaks from the walls, heightening the sense that the place held a dark secret. At that moment, we realized we were deeply immersed in a setting where fear was not just a possibility, it was a certainty, and we were ready, or perhaps not so ready, to face it. When we found a locked room, we felt like we were about to uncover something important, perhaps the final piece of a dark puzzle. The door was heavy metal, and with much effort we managed to force it open. Upon entering, we were stunned by the state of the place. Unlike the other deteriorated rooms, this one seemed frozen in time. The chairs were arranged in a circle, as if a meeting had been abruptly interrupted and abandoned without explanation. In the center, a wheelchair stood out. It looked almost new, untouched, contrasting with the dust and rust around it. When one of us got closer and touched it, a loud, piercing noise echoed through the room, like a violent bang. We couldn't pinpoint its source, but it seemed to vibrate from every direction surrounding us. In that instant, we felt the same chill. Pure fear took over, and in the silence that followed, our hearts beat in accelerated, tense unison. That was when we decided it was time to leave. But as we turned, we noticed something unsettling. The hallway we had crossed was no longer the same. The doors that were once open were now all closed, and the corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, as if the hospital itself was changing its structure. We started walking, but each step seemed to take us deeper into an endless maze. The flashlights began to falter, flickering as if they were on the verge of going out completely, threatening to leave us in absolute darkness. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all knew the truth that our faces revealed. We were trapped in a place that seemed to have a life of its own, as if the hospital was determined to swallow us whole. Every attempt to find the exit led us to a new hallway, a new set of closed doors, while the sound of mysterious whispers filled the silence. They seemed to follow us, growing louder with every turn, echoing in a language we couldn't understand, but that sent a chill down our spines. Then, at the end of one of the corridors, something made me stop. There, cloaked in shadows, was a motionless figure just watching us. It was a dark silhouette without details, yet with an ominously dense presence. We were paralyzed, unable to look away, as if the figure had us hypnotized with an invisible gaze. The feeling was that something ancient, something we could never understand, was standing before us. And in that moment we realized the hospital held far more than cold walls and ancient echoes. The shadow began moving toward us, and what I saw made my blood run cold. That thing was not a person. Its posture was twisted, bent in a supernatural way, with arms and legs that were far too long and thin, like twisted extensions of pure darkness. Each movement was slow, calculated, but terrifying enough. Without a second thought, we exchanged quick glances and started running, survival instinct taking over our bodies. We didn't know where to go. We just ran through the endless corridors, trying to open doors that all seemed locked. The sound of that creature's footsteps echoed closer, beating with a strange and rapid rhythm, while our exhaustion grew and despair began gripping our hearts. Each of us was gasping for breath, and the thought that we might not escape started forming in our minds. After what felt like an eternity, in a moment of pure instinct, we turned one last corner and, to our surprise, found an open door. We didn't think twice and ran outside without looking back. The cool night air felt unreal after the suffocating corridors of the hospital, yet the silence outside was disturbingly calm, as if the building wanted to pretend that nothing had happened. We stopped a few meters ahead, gasping, all of us seemingly in shock with wide eyes and pale expressions. No one said a word, and deep down, we all knew we didn't want to talk about what we had witnessed in there. The experience had left a deep mark on us, an invisible scar. In that moment, any desire for adventure seemed absurd. The days that followed were filled with a strange emptiness. I tried looking for information about the hospital, anything that might explain what we saw. But I found nothing. No accounts, no records mentioning transforming hallways or shadows that pursued people. It was as if that experience existed only in our minds, and yet I knew it was real. Sometimes, even now, I feel an inexplicable chill, a sensation that something is watching me. There are moments when I catch a movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that seems to follow me. I believe it's still there, waiting, lurking, as if longing for a reunion, waiting to drag me back to that place where, for some reason, we were allowed to escape. That time. I had already heard various stories about that abandoned banquet hall on the outskirts of town. They said it was once the center of incredible celebrations, glamorous weddings, and extravagant events that attracted people from all over the city. But for some dark reason, it had been shut down over a decade ago, left to linger in people's imaginations and the rumors circulating about the place. My curiosity was piqued by these tales, and on a Friday night, I decided to explore the place. The thrill of urban exploration took hold of me, and the rumors of a strange clown that supposedly appeared there in the early hours made me even more intrigued. They said that anyone who crossed paths with him was never the same again, but in my mind it was just a good story to tell later. When I entered, the smell of mold mixed with dust was so strong it felt almost solid, filling the air like an ancient heavy mist. With a flashlight in hand, its weak light illuminated the worn walls where remnants of party decorations still hung, left behind and forgotten by time. Faded streamers, deflated balloons, and torn ornaments were scattered, as if the last event had just ended and no one bothered to clean up. As I ventured further into the hall, the atmosphere grew denser, the absolute silence amplifying the sound of my footsteps, and slowly, my heartbeat began to pound harder, as if it too was part of the scene. There was something strange, almost magical, in the way silence seemed to have a life of its own there. Reaching the old stage, I felt a chill when I noticed a row of chairs, perfectly arranged, facing it, It was as if some invisible audience awaited a show that would never come. I paused for a moment, trying to understand how those chairs had been placed there so meticulously. There was an eerie sense of presence, as if the hall still held something from its past, something dark and enigmatic. Suddenly, the idea of a wandering clown no longer seemed so absurd. The shadows on the chairs and the stage seemed to dance with the weak flashlight beam, creating the illusion of figures moving around, watching me, waiting for a show that perhaps I had just started. It was then that, in the distance, I noticed a figure moving at the far end of the hall. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, something caused by the dim light, but as my vision adjusted, I realized it was someone. This was not just any shadow. The figure moved slowly closer, and soon I could make out the outfit. A clown costume, completely faded, dirty, and stained, as if it had been abandoned there for decades. His face was covered in smeared makeup, barely concealing a grotesque smile painted ear to ear, larger than any human smile could ever be. When he locked eyes with me, he stopped as if studying me, and the weight of that stare sent a chill down my spine. The air around me felt thick, almost difficult to breathe, and each second of that eye contact made time slow down as if eternity had been compressed into that single instant. For a moment I thought of running, but my muscles refused to obey. My legs were frozen, as if some invisible force anchored me to the ground, leaving me vulnerable at the mercy of that sinister figure. The clown then moved forward, taking a silent step, never breaking eye contact. The silence heightened the terror, an absence of sound more intense than any scream. Retreating was my only option, and I began to take hesitant steps backward, trying to keep a safe distance. Yet the door seemed farther and farther away, as if the hall stretched endlessly. My heart pounded in my chest and echoed in my throat, each beat a reminder that I was still there, trapped in this surreal situation. As he took a few more steps, something disturbing drew my attention to his shoes. There was a dark stain running down his costume's leg, trickling over the fabric, a sinister trail that seemed to tell a story. I blinked several times, hoping it was just dirt or some kind of paint, but it didn't take long to recognize the horrifying truth. That stain was dried blood, embedded in the fabric like a mark from his last appearance. The mixture of silence, the figure's proximity, and the evidence of violence finally made me grasp the severity of the situation. Unable to control the rising panic with each passing second, I turned and began to run, not daring to look back. The chairs in front of me turned into obstacles, and as desperation took over, I stumbled over them, nearly falling onto one before regaining my balance. My footsteps echoed through the empty hall like a sinister soundtrack accompanying my escape, and the sound of heavy, steady steps behind me made me realize he was coming. Fast. I could feel his presence drawing closer, like a growing shadow threatening to consume me. Every time I tried to speed up, the weight of his gaze, though unseen, seemed to pull me back, as if he was just a step away, ready to end the chase. The exit door was at the end of the hallway, and I ran toward it, my only hope of escaping. My legs were heavy, my heart racing and my breath short, but I kept running with all the strength I had left. The hallway seemed to stretch further with every step, but suddenly everything stopped. The sound of footsteps disappeared, and absolute silence took over once more. I turned, gasping for air, expecting to see him, but he was gone, as if he'd never existed. All that remained was the echo of my breathing, filling the empty space around me, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that the danger hadn't passed. When I finally managed to leave the hall, I looked back, and there he was. Standing by the door, the clown silently watched me, waving slowly, with a macabre smile I will never forget. It was a smile that conveyed the certainty that that night had only been the beginning, as if he knew that one day I would return to the hall. Worse yet, it felt like he could find me wherever I was at any moment. Since that night, I feel like I'm being watched. Everywhere, in every situation, the feeling that he's near never leaves me. I feel that the sinister game between us is far from over and that he's merely waiting for the right moment to pick up where we left off.